In this demonstration, I'll describe the steps while working within the Design tab within Omega. If we look up to the left side of the screen, we can see at the very top here, we have a down arrow. If we click the down arrow, there are several wizards that have been created. We're going to work within the transtibial modification wizard or stack. It's already been selected. So the first tool that we want to use is the PTB patella tendon bar and interosseous modification. So we click that, and now that is the only one, or the one that's been opened up, and the only one that will be within use. You can see that we have a tool with, we're going to select the basically 7/8 inch size tool, fixed depth, and we're going to go with approximately a 5/16 inch depth. Actually, let's go to about a 3/8 inch depth for starters. Okay, so we're going to take and position our mouse about halfway up the patella. So we can see our patella here. You'll also notice that all the other reflectors or markers that were on the model have now disappeared, and the only ones that remain are the ones that we placed in the Capture tab. So I'm going to start about halfway up the patella and off to the side. I can actually go out into the field with my cursor and rotate the model slightly. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to carve in our patella tendon bar. So I'm going to left click and hold and begin to carve in my patella tendon bar, which is now going to go through my marker that I placed. And you can take your time and carve this patella tendon bar in using the tool. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to rotate the model around, and you can either continue on where you were or go up to the other side of the patella and work your way down, and really whatever your preference is. And this looks a little ragged and jagged, and that's just fine. I'm going to go back in the field, swing this around, and have a look at this. Now this is a deep 3/8 inch modification. Okay, we're going to go down here to the bottom right hand corner of this window. I'm going to left click, it's going to open up another window, and I'm going to select the 1-inch blend. I believe that might have been what was open. We'll re-click it. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to blend this together. So blending is a combination of sanding and blending and adding, and kind of what you would do with a wet sanding screen. Sand it all together. Try to move quickly and not just hold it in one spot. In the end, we have about a 3/8 inch, nice rounded out patella tendon bar. And that's done. Now, this is a right patient. The other thing is we have a beacon down here, and it will tell us what is lateral, what is medial. The other modification we want to make here is in this interosseous space. I'm going to increase the size of the tool to approximately 1 inch. I'm not going to go with a 3/8 inch depth. I'm actually going to reduce that down to about 3/16 of an inch. After I start to carve this area in, I can actually go back and make it deeper if I feel I need to. I'm going to start at about the height of the fibular head and the marker I have here. I do want to rotate this around so I can get a better look at it and maybe tip it slightly. Start right about here. I'm going to follow the line of the tibia. And I want to stop about 1 inch from the distal end. I right-click, but I can erase that very easily. So I'm going to broaden this out a little bit and carry it over toward the head of the fibula and along the fibular shaft. Now, it's a lot easier to do this just in one with a larger tool, but I'm going to do this just by making a second sweep along the side. Okay. This is a big, broad area, so don't get too close to the head of the fibula. And now I'm going to right-click and blend this out, but I'm actually going to go with a 2-inch blending tool. This is a very nice modification along this, or between these two bones, which will help with rotation within the socket and also help to increase your total contact within the socket. Once we soften this up, we'll rotate this up and just have a look at that. So that looks very nice. So there is the interosseous modification. And that's all we need to do within this step. We're going to move on to the cutting plane. I'm going to click my medial button and flip this around. At the very proximal portion of our model, we have this extra piece of material. We don't need it. We're going to pull the cutting blade or plane into the model, and we're going to get it fairly close to this calf area here. And we're just going to get rid of that section of our model. So we're going to, it shows a rating here of 11/16 of a material. We're going to just cut that off, pull our screen back, and just pull this around, and it just shows an area that's been trimmed off and flattened off. That's all we need to do with that step. We're going to move on to the narrow ML, and we see these two pointers that appear. We're going to take this first red line and pull this down to the narrowest part, just to this medial flare area. We're going to take our second red line, and basically by grabbing this gray box, we're going to pull it down to the widest part. Basically, this is where we measure our ML, the widest part of the knee. If I take my green line, marry it up to the red line, and then look over to the measurement box on the right, we have an original measurement and a current measurement. If I look at that lowest line in the top 4 boxes, one says ML. It tells me my current ML is 4 and 11/16. Well, I have to refer to my measurement sheet here. My measurement sheet tells me that my ML needs to be 4 1/4 inches. So I'm going to tighten up my ML on both the medial and lateral sides, and you can see how that's going in. So I'm going to tighten it up 3/16 here. I'll tighten it up an equal amount on the opposite side. I'll put the green line back in line with the red line. I have to go a little bit more. I'll go a little bit tighter on both sides. Now we want to be careful and not to get too aggressive by tightening this, but if we can get it pretty close, and there we are, 4 1/4. We've accomplished our goal, and we can move on to our next step. That's how you tighten up the ML using CAD, and this is pretty slick. And we've maintained our shape, okay, from this medial flare all the way to the top. We've tightened it up in this plane and in the medial lateral plane. We're going to move on to the next step. All right, before we tighten up our AP, I found it actually works pretty well if we remove a little bit of material here on the back side of the kind of that popliteal fossa region of the leg. And we're just going to use a tool size of about 1 1/8 inch, fixed depth, and we're going to just take off about 3/16 of an inch of material. Actually, we can go a little less than that. We'll go about 1/8. We're going to just take a triangular piece of material off here. We're going to go above our markers, Let's clean that up. And we're not even going to blend these edges. We're just going to leave it just like that. And we're going to just move right on to the next step. I'm going to spin this back around. All right, there's a number of steps involved with this caliper tool. First one is this first top-down arrow. We're going to left click and we're going to select the PTB. The next down arrow, we're going to select not the level of the shelf, but the popliteal compression. And then 2 pointers are going to appear. I'm just going to go out into the field and we can see our pointers. Now, before we move on, if we just start changing this now, it's going to change the entire model, and we don't want to do that. So we want to look at the back side of our model here, and this area, this triangular area that we've already cleaned up, we're going to go to the Add button, left click it, and now we can take and add a couple of markers in here. We're just going to place 3 of them by left clicking. We're going to do the same to the front. I'm just going to place a couple of arrows. Actually, you know what? We're not going to do that. We can leave that one there. We're going to click Done. And we're only going to change the back side of this. So grab this back arrow and left click. And again, we have to refer to our measurement sheet. And you see how I'm tightening up this back side of this model? Now I've gone a lot here and we don't need to go this far. I just want to illustrate what this tool will do. It's only tightening up the back of the model. Okay, now I accidentally placed one on the front, but we're not going to change that. We're tightening up the back of our model, and my measurement sheet shows me or tells me that I need to tighten up the popliteal area to get it to 4 1/4 inches. And there it is. So my patient's AP is 4 1/4. This distance now tells me I'm at 4 1/4, and it only tightened up the back of the model. The front hasn't changed, and the rest of my model didn't change. So, and this is why I mentioned before, is I took a little bit out of the back here first before I did anything, and now I left this dimple area here. So this adjustment has now been made. Okay, we've tightened it up where we needed it, and we haven't tightened it up anywhere else where we don't need it. We're going to move on to the next step. We're going to add our posterior shelf. In here, we should have our markers for the shelf. Oops. I'm going to tip this, spin it around. What we want to do is we have these 2 lines, and we want to pull these bottom lines down so that we have some separation. For some reason, our markers have disappeared, and that's okay, because we have this line here helping to illustrate where it was. So we want our lateral side to remain higher than our medial side. So I'm going to pull these down. I'm going to leave this one to the center. Leaving my lateral posterior trim lines higher, and then I'm going to let this medial side drop down about 1/4 inch lower, creating somewhat of a swinging W shape. And then with this lower set of lines, I'm just basically going to mimic the upper set of lines to create somewhat of a swoop or a flare. Okay. And that looks good. I'm going to zoom out, left click and spin, and then I'm going to go up here and straighten it out. Now, with this arrow, this is the only one we have to touch. We're going to take this, and you're going to see a red line pop out at the bottom down here. And as soon as I release it, you're going to see this posterior shelf appear. And there it is. All right, and now we can go ahead and spin this around. And there it is. So the lateral trim is higher, posterior or medial side is lower. That medial hamstring is more to the inside, and it is lower. All right, and we're going to leave it look just like this for the time being and move on to the next step, which is a cutting plane. All right, we're going to hit the medial, and you'll notice the cutting plane is here already. What we're going to do now is we're going to pull this back into our model to the point where it's a 1/4 inch or so away from the model, and we're just going to cut this off. We're going to pull this back out of our way, spin this around, straighten it out a little bit, and we don't want that giant shelf back here. You can actually, I'm going to just hit medial again, pull it back in, and I'm going to actually cut off a little bit more because I don't want a big giant shelf. So let's cut off a little bit more. And that looks even better. Okay, there it is. We're going to move on to the next step. Now we have our AP pretty close. We're going to actually clean it up a little bit more. We have our ML. The only thing we don't have are the circumferences here. So we're going to do that right now. There's a couple of things we want to pay attention to though. We don't want to take any material off on the skeletal anatomy of the tibia or the fibula. So we're going to pay attention to removing material only behind the tibia and the fibula back here. So I'm going to go back to the medial side and we're going to start there. So with our tool width, we're going to go up to a tool width of about 1.5 inches, fixed depth, and we're only going to start with 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to spin this just this way a little bit. Our tibia is going to come back a little bit behind the midpoint of the model here. And I'm going to, because of the tool size I'm using, I'm going to start low. And now I'm just doing, I guess what you could call as a global reduction on the posterior aspect, the soft tissue area of the limb here. Staying away from that shelf. And we're going to have to refer to our measurement sheet here. I'm going to flip this up and take some off just the very distal end and the posterior aspect of the distal end. You can see where we took a little bit off there at that triangular piece to prepare for our AP reduction and staying behind the shaft of the fibula. All right, I have a 2-inch blend currently, so I'm going to leave it there, tip it up again, take just a little bit more here. Good, and I'm ready to blend. I'm going to blend this down and try to work quickly. So we're not adding any more than we have to by blending. Blend right across the bottom. This little bit of a dimple look there, and we can actually start to blend some of this back out. And that's looking pretty nice. Now before we go on to the next remove, there are two remove materials in this soft tissue area so that we can get our circumferences correct. You have to refer back to your measurement sheets here and go to the midpoint, look up at the circumference measurements and see where you're at. Go to the midpoint, 1 inch from the distal end, and cross-reference the measurement sheet and see where you're at. And spin this around and have a look at things. The shape's looking pretty good at this point. We'll go to the anterior and then back to posterior. Based on my measurement sheet, I need to go a little bit tighter here. So I'm going to go on to the next step. Okay, same size tool, and I'm going to reduce another 1/8 of an inch and tighten this model up a little bit more. Same routine. I'm just taking another 1/8 of an inch, same area, with the exception of that distal end. I'm not going to remove another 1/8 of an inch there. So rather than just take more in one modification, I like to do it in 2 steps. Okay, and then go back and blend again. You can see it's creating that nice little flare there. Okay, just blending, blending, blending. Again, we go down to the distal end here. Now our distal circumference is 10 1/4. That's getting me closer. And that looks good. Now my circumferences are matching. Whoops, I'm going to undo that. And I have the shape I want. Again, once this is carved, this little bit of waviness here, a sanding screen goes a long way. And we took a very nice scan in the very beginning, and we've had to do no changes to the front of this patient's limb. We scanned directly over the skin and not over a liner. If we want to pull a socket over the liner, we can roll the liner right over the model and pull our plastic that way. So this is like a skin fit modification. So we have a nice flat look here, interosseous. The only thing we have left to do now is add material. We're going to add very small buildups. So the only buildups we're going to add are a very small triangular kind of tear-shaped buildup here. We're going to do fixed buildup. We'll use 1 inch and just an 1/8 of an inch on the very anterior distal end of the tibia. We're going to stay away from the interosseous space. We're going to come down here. Again, 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to blend all edges. And then the head of the fibula, we're going to make this smaller, 11/16, and somewhat of a horseshoe shape on the head of the fibula. And just blend all that together. And that would be if the patient simply slides through this socket, they're going to bang on the distal aspect of the head of the fibula. The only 2 buildups we need to build or add. Okay, and then any other blending that we think we need to do, we can blend this together a little bit, blend that. This is all going to get cut away at the top, maybe a little bit of blending there. This model is now modified and ready for fabrication. Again, we can spin it around, have any look at it. We have our trims. Looks fantastic. Completed. That's how you modify using CAD.